Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about what I read in September of 2018 and what I am currently reading. Unfortunately, I've been dealing with some hard things off camera, and so like most other months this year, my reading has fallen a little bit behind expectations, but the reading that I did do was very interesting indeed. So let's get started talking about the books. As I normally do, I will first start by talking about all the books that I have not previously discussed in other videos, then I will move on to talk about any DNFs. I will then talk about books I have discussed in other videos, and then I'll tell you what I'm currently reading. I will start off by talking about the book off of my young professional TBR for the month. That was Originals, How Nonconformists Move the World by Adam Grant. I did decide to pick this one up because I do consider myself to be a bit of a nonconformist, but this one ended up being very different than what I anticipated it being, not necessarily in a bad way. The book starts off by discussing why humans tend to fixate on the status quo and why that can lead to trouble. It then moves on to discuss why original thinking is important, how to encourage it in the workplace, and how to get others to be receptive to new ways of thinking. Though this book ended up being way more workplace focused than I originally anticipated it being, I still really enjoyed a lot of Grant's examples. They have really stuck with me. I think a lot about the one where he talks about why original thinkers tend to be Firefox or Google Chrome users when it comes to your web browser. Original thinkers are much less likely to accept something just because it is given to you as the defaults. So non-original thinkers are more likely to use Internet Explorer or Safari, the things that come with your computer. Meanwhile, original thinkers are much more likely to actually expend effort and go out and find a potentially better option. In the book, he also discussed something called niche theory, which I had never heard of before. It's a theory that explains why younger siblings are much more likely to be comedians or creatives or take on more untraditional roles. I won't go too far in depth explaining this because Adam Grant does a much better job of explaining it in the book, but the idea is that older siblings have probably already laid claim to more traditional roles by the time the younger siblings come around, and so they have more of a flexibility in their options because those other roles have already been taken. It frees them up to be more creative. Adam Grant points to this theory to explain why most comedians tend to be younger children, if not the youngest children in their families. Overall, I think this book was very intriguing, but I do think the people who will connect with it the most are the people who pick it up for the same reasons that I did, for business development purposes. Also in September, I read The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I read this as a part of a read-along that was hosted by Katie over at Books and Things. I decided to join in on this read-along not just because this was a book I was very interested in finally picking up, but also because this book was on my top 10 most popular books on my TBR list, and I had made it a late addition to my yearly reading goals to try to read 3, maybe 4 books off of that list. So when I saw that Katie was hosting this read-along, it felt meant to be. This book begins with a biographer out of the blue receiving a letter from a very famous yet very reclusive author, Vida Winter. Up to this point, Ms. Winter has never told the truth about her own story. Instead, she's been living in the world of her own characters and spins falsehoods to whomever comes looking for the whole truth. But now, facing old age and illness, Vida Winter is finally ready to tell her story. And she's going to tell it to this biographer, Margaret Lee, whose own background has some eerie parallels to the story that Vida Winter begins to tell her. This is Katie's favorite modern novel, and I can totally see why. It was absolutely fabulous. The dark atmosphere and gothic vibe of this book completely sucked me in. And when the read-along started, the weather here in Pittsburgh started getting cooler, and so it made this all the more perfect of a reading experience. So if you're looking for a gothic fall read or enjoy books about books, I cannot recommend this highly enough. Now let me briefly talk about my one DNF for the month. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I honestly don't have that much to say about it. That book was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. I believe I was about 200 pages into this book before ultimately deciding to put it down. I was really hoping to love this, but I just couldn't get invested in it. I ended up finding it really stuffy in tone. This book is set in a world where magic once existed in Britain but has since died off, except for two magicians who are able to still practice it, but who have very different approaches. I could feel that the language in this book was inspired by Victorian writers, I would say particularly by Charles Dickens, but I feel like it lacked the charm that I come to associate with Victorian writing. It felt really overly starched and stiff, and one of the magicians we don't even meet until we're really far into the book. I was straight up dreading picking this book up every evening, and especially with everything I had going on this month, that's just really not how I wanted to be feeling about the books that I was reading. So unfortunately, I put this one down. And now to briefly talk about all the books that I have mentioned in other videos that I have posted over the month, the first of those is The Lessons by Naomi Alderman. This is a pretty vanilla campus novel set at Oxford where an outsider becomes integrated into an eccentric group of friends with a deeply wounded rich boy at the center. If you'd like to hear me talk a little bit more about this book, I did discuss it in a video I did all about books that have a similar setup to The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Also this month, I listened to Dr. Katz, the audiobook, with my husband. This is an Audible original audiobook that gives all new material for fans of the Dr. Katz Professional Therapist TV show that aired in the 90s. My husband and I are big fans of Dr. Katz, so we sat down to discuss our feelings on the audiobook and the TV show. If you were interested in watching that video, I will link that down below for you. And then I read two more books in September. The first of those was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. This was a buddy read with the lovely Britta over at the second shelf. This is a very famous coming-of-age tale set in Brooklyn in the early 20th century. In it, we follow young Francie Nolan and her family. We see them struggle, but we also see them make the most out of whatever life hands them. Though it is not a very structured novel, it is completely endearing and totally worthy of being called a modern classic. And I also read All Among the Barley by Melissa Harrison. This is another coming-of-age tale following preteen Edie living in the interwar years in the British countryside. Edie is a part of a family of farmers who are really struggling to make ends meet. This book overall has a very melancholy tone, but some really beautiful nature writing. Since these two books were both coming-of-age tales and had very interesting similarities and differences, the biggest difference between them being their setting, one is set in a very urban area and one a very rural area, I decided to do a dual review of these books. It is a review that I highly enjoyed doing, and I will link it down below if you'd like to see it. And here at the end of this wrap-up video, I would like to quickly tell you about the two different books that I am currently reading. The first of those is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. This was my pick off of my Classics TBR for September that I am still working on. To be completely honest with you, I have considered DNFing this one on a few different occasions. I am just not super into weird literature, and I feel like every piece of Russian literature that I have ever attempted to read is weird. I very frequently feel limited by my extremely rational, logical brain. Like, my husband is a huge fan of Twin Peaks, but I can never sit down and enjoy that with him because I find it so absurd. And if I find it absurd, then I don't like it. For now, I am sticking with this book. I am really hoping that there will come a point in this book where I start to click with it. But at this point, I am starting to have some real questions about whether or not I will ever be able to connect to Russian literature. But to end on a much more positive note, I am currently reading and really enjoying The Witch Elm by Tana French. This is an art copy of Tana French's new book that is due to be released in very early October. This is, per her typical style, a mystery thriller, but this is the first book that she has written that is not a part of the Devlin Murder Squad series. I am really enjoying this one so far, and I'm actually hoping to do a full review of this one, so keep an eye out for that. So those were all of the books that I finished in September and what I am currently reading. As always, I would love to hear from you in the comment section down below. Have you read any of these books? Have you heard of any of them? Are you now interested in reading them after hearing me talk about them? The comment section down below is a great place to chat with me, but you can also find me on a variety of different places on social media. The links to all of my profiles are linked in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you in the next video. Bye.